Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. And I'm really excited for today's virtual field trip. We are at the Virginia Zoo in Norfolk, Virginia, and we are going to meet some awesome amphibians. So during the course of this adventure today, we are going to learn why they're such a unique group in the animal kingdom. We'll learn about some of their traits and, of course, some of their adaptations that allow them to survive in some pretty cool environments. I'm really excited to introduce Stephanie and Jess, who will be joining us today and sharing some new friends with us. And then, of course, we're going to have some time to do a little bit of Q&A. So Stephanie, Jess, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
No problem. Hello.
All right. Well, I know that the Virginia Zoo has some really cool amphibians, and we'd love to meet some of them. We'd love to learn about some of their traits. And yeah, then we'll let the students take over with their questions.
Okay. All right. So hi, everybody. I'm Jess. That was Stephanie. We do have some pretty awesome amphibians for you to meet today. Stephanie actually just went to get our first one. But first, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to what makes an amphibian an amphibian. So that's a pretty big word for some of my younger groups. I know we do have some younger groups here. So Amphibian or bean, if it's easier to remember it that way. An amphibian is an animal that spends part of its life in the water as a baby, and then as it becomes an adult, it moves on land or has the ability to go onto land most of the time. So amphibian, the word means dual life or two lives. Amphibians start off as a little egg, and that egg has to be laid in the water because it does not have an eggshell. And then when that egg hatches, you might see a tadpole or some other little larva swimming around. You may have seen tadpoles in a pond or a lake. Those tadpoles then have to go through something called metamorphosis to turn into an adult. So all amphibians have those traits in common. They also have really, really special skin. You might have seen that Stephanie had some purple gloves on. I'll be wearing them also a little bit later. We have to wear gloves when we handle our amphibians because their skin is able to take in air and nutrients from the world around them. So when they live in a pond or a lake, depending on how clean or healthy that lake is, they could have a really, really great time. Or if the lake is really dirty and polluted, they're probably not going to want to live there anymore because they can absorb all of that stuff from the water. No problems. We just dropped something. From the water into their bodies. So that's why we don't want to touch them with our hands, which could have lotion or Germ-X or dirt from outside because we're at the zoo and who knows what's going on. So even though all amphibians have these things in common, they are very, very different. There are salamanders, frogs, toads, and another group called caecilians, which we're not going to meet today. But we are going to meet the first three, and Stephanie has got our first one. She's going to talk to you a little bit about salamanders to start us off.
All right, guys. So I have our first friend is a salamander. Her name is Beaker. She's actually called a tiger salamander because they do have kind of tiger stripes on their back. So you can kind of see those stripes that she has. Now, salamanders actually encompass about 500 species of amphibians out there. So our salamanders are typically going to look a lot like this. They're going to have that long body. They're also going to have short little stubby legs and then a long tail. So salamanders can be found pretty much throughout the United States. And we actually have more salamanders in the North Americas than any other country in the world. So they are typically a species that's going to be found here. These guys here are typically going to be carnivores. They're going to eat little snails and slugs and anything that they can find outside in their environment. They will live mostly on land, but some salamanders will transition and be more in water. And then there are a couple that are actually going to be found completely on land. Our little salamander friend here is actually one of the larger salamanders, but they can have two species of salamanders actually get up to 5 feet in length, so they can get much larger. However, most of them are going to be this big or a little bit smaller. We have some spotted salamanders here in Virginia. We also have some marbled salamanders, so those are all different little guys that we have. Now, salamanders are going to be typically found kind of near moist water areas. They're going to be found near some ground they can dig into. They definitely like to dig and burrow. And you actually can't see them a lot because in the daytime or when it's warmer, they're going to be completely underground, and they can also stay underground for several weeks at a time where they don't need to come up for food. So during the really harsh environments, if it's really hot in the summer or really cold in the winter, they're going to be completely buried and they're going to stay right down there. So our little tiger salamander here is going to be found right here across the coastline as well as throughout North America. And she's mostly going to be eating invertebrates or other insects. So she's going to eat different types of things, lots of worms and slugs. So her main job is going to be to control all of those bug populations and help us to keep those down. So we are going to meet a different type of animal. So our salamander is one of our types of amphibians. So next we are actually going to show you a different type of frog. So we're going to take Miss Beaker back and let her have a chance to hang out, and you'll get to see one of our frog friends.
All right, you guys. So this is a frog, like Miss Stephanie said. Let me let you get a really good look at his cute little face. So this is Humpty Dumpty. He is a White's tree frog. White's tree frogs are found in Australia and Papua New Guinea, which is a little bit north of Australia. They are unique even among frogs because they have very, very thick skin, which some scientists think they can use to control how much water leaves their body. So remember we said that frogs and salamanders and toads have that unique adaptation to absorb things through their skin. And sometimes that means they can't always control what comes in and what goes out. But White's tree frogs have developed this adaptation to be able to retain water more easily because they live in areas that go through very distinct dry and wet seasons. We're going to let him climb. Hold on. So he is a White's tree frog, so he does like to climb, although he is trying to hide his face right now. I'm not sure what that's about. He's getting camera shy. So frogs are different from salamanders, obviously. They're different in more ways than just the way that they look, but that's going to be the main difference. So frogs have these sticky feet, some of them that they can use to stick to things. They've also got those, oh goodness. Hold on one second. Where are you trying to go? Oh, it is great. Are you good? They've also got those really strong legs that salamanders do not have that they can use to leap. If you've ever played leapfrog, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Frogs are also very unique because they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. So a lot of times salamanders, they're going to differ with how big they are, but their basic body shape is roughly the same. Frogs can look like Humpty Dumpty here, where they're very small and kind of spindly, climbing all over the place. They can also be kind of short and stout and a little fat. They can be really, really tiny, like a dart frog, and they can even be huge, like a bullfrog. So I'm actually going to put him in his little clear container that we transport him in, and you guys are going to get a better look at him. Give me 1 second. Oh, don't climb up me. Gosh, there he goes. Technical difficulties. So hopefully the glare's not too bad. There we go. And now you guys can see him moving around with those sticky feet on his toe pads. That helps him climb trees and leaves and other things in his natural habitat. So I said that frogs are pretty unique, but they do look a lot like toads. And honestly, there's not a lot of differences between frogs and toads, but there are a couple. Frogs actually have small teeth-like things in their mouth called odontoids, and that is the main way that we tell the difference. Some people say that there are other differences in their bone structure and their habits, but as of right now, the only solid difference that we have are those tiny little teeth that frogs have in their mouths. Toads do not have those teeth. They just have gums. They don't even have dentures that they can use. So I think Stephanie is actually going to bring out an example. Oh my goodness, look at that. An example of a toad, but you guys can see Humpty Dumpty's amazing adaptation kind of crawling all over the ground here. He's called Humpty Dumpty because he's kind of got a fat belly like Humpty Dumpty. All right, I'm going to let Stephanie take over.
All right, guys, so this is a cane toad. So these guys are a little bit different than a frog. Our cane toad here is named Naveen. We also have a Tiana in our collection as well. We do like our Disney names. So Naveen here is what's called a cane toad. So these type of toads have a little bit drier skin. They're not usually going to be found strictly in the water. Toads typically are going to be found more on land, and they're going to have that kind of dry skin versus the real slimy skin that the frogs do. Like Jess said, they do not have those teeth in their mouth. But you can look at the different adaptations in their feet. So I'm going to bring him up a little bit closer. So his feet are not really made more for swimming. His feet are made more to kind of dig through the dirt. They're typically going to burrow themselves in the dirt. Now, they are normally going to be found around Texas into South America, but our cane toads here have actually been introduced into some other areas. Now, they brought them into parts of Australia because they wanted them to eat a type of insect that was found there that was kind of a pest. But now our cane toad has become what's called an invasive species. So that means that he is not normally found in that space, but he is now in that area. And because he has no natural predators, they're actually starting to take over. So cane toads can eat anything that they can fit in their mouth. So he's going to eat insects. He's going to eat small mice. They might eat any kind of large flying insects as well. So anything that they fit in their mouth, and then they don't have any natural predators. So there is nobody there that is going to eat him because he is not from that area. Something else that they have these little sacs on the back of their back here, these right here, and those are actually little poison sacs. So what he can do is release a toxic secretion from those, which is a bufotoxin. So it's something that's actually going to kill any type of predator that's going to eat them. So unfortunately, they're kind of taking over the space. And now, because they don't have any natural predators and they have those toxic secretions, that is something that is giving them the ability to thrive and survive, but is unfortunately not good for the native species that are there. Now, our cane toads here are typically going to dig around in the dirt. They're going to kind of burrow themselves down. You can tell that they have a lot of different coloring to them, so I'm going to kind of show you his back here. So he has some browns and some greens. So typically all you're going to see sticking up are those little eyes sticking out. He's usually going to be mostly down below, and then you're just going to see his eyes because he's what's called an ambush predator. So what he's going to do is he's going to wait underneath the dirt, and no one's going to be able to see him. And then he's going to jump out and grab his food. So he's going to ambush that. You might see his little throat moving a little here. He's actually vocalizing. So they do have different vocalizations that they will make. You probably can't hear it on the video, but you can probably see his throat moving. And those vocalizations are going to be different calls that they're either going to call to other toads that are near them, or they're also going to call maybe to ward off or scare off something. So with him, he's not a really big jumper, so he's not going to jump really big distances like a bullfrog might. But what he's going to do is kind of do some small little leaps and hops. So our next amphibian friend looks a lot like our cane toad. So we're going to show you him next and learn a little bit more about his coloring.
Okay, so like Stephanie said, this is an animal that looks a lot like, let me actually make it so you can see him. He looks a lot like a toad, but he's actually a frog. He is an ornate horned frog, or a Pac-Man frog. His name is Atari. And the reason that he is a frog and not a toad is because he does have those odontode projections that frogs have in their mouths. So Atari here, he's got those tiny little teeth-like things in his mouth that help him to grip his food and eat it. He's called a Pac-Man frog because I don't know if you guys are old enough to play Pac-Man or if you've heard of it, but Pac-Man is a little guy that eats pretty much everything in its path, and Atari here is a little guy who eats pretty much everything in its path. He's going to try to eat bugs, small mammals, birds, other frogs, other horned frogs. He's going to eat pretty much anything he can fit in his mouth, and sometimes he's going to try to eat things that can't fit in his mouth. So he's got eyes bigger than his stomach, as we say, and he does have some pretty small eyes. So one thing that we do want to talk about, and Miss Stephanie's going to bring out another friend here in a second. Frogs and toads and salamanders don't have a whole lot in the way of defense. They don't have sharp claws usually. They have those little teeth if they're frogs, but those teeth are pretty tiny. They're not really great defense. So Atari's first thing that he's going to do to try to protect himself is hide. And he has this really great thing called camouflage. If you guys have spent any time around a zoo, or if you have any sort of experience learning about this kind of thing, you've probably heard that word before. And if you haven't, camouflage just means that you blend in with your surroundings. So I'm going to get a little closer so you can see his coloring. You can see that Atari's got this wonderful, if he stops moving, you'll be able to see it, green and brown coloration, and that's because he lives in the rainforest where there's lots of green and there's lots of brown. So he does a really great job of blending in or camouflaging with his surroundings. And that's a really, really great way to hide from predators who might try to eat him. Now, not all frogs or other amphibians have that camouflage coloration. You might be thinking like, oh, a poison dart frog is bright green or bright blue, and that's a completely different thing. So they could camouflage on a really bright background, but they're going to use those colors for something else, and I'm going to let Stephanie talk about that. Say bye.
All right, so our next one might be a little bit harder to see, so I'm going to kind of bring her close so you can see her face. This is what's called a tomato frog. So you can see she has some really bright colors. And those bright colors, typically when you see a bright color in nature, it means a warning color. So her bright red color is not going to help her camouflage, but it's going to help her talk to the other animals that are out there in nature with her. So she is going to be found in Madagascar. Her name is Ruby because she is bright red. And with that tomato color, she's called a tomato frog. So these tomato frogs are only found in Madagascar. So they're only found in one place in the world. And that bright red color is a warning color because she is actually able to produce a kind of mucousy secretion all over her skin. So she kind of looks like she has snot all over her skin for those younger kids. So she kind of has all this white foamy stuff on her. And then if something tries to eat her, it's going to clog up their mouth. So she is going to be able to run away and get away or hop away because the predator is going to be kind of trying to get that yucky taste out of their mouth. So with that, she can protect herself. So she has that kind of toxic secretion. So that's going to be kind of like a poison because it's going to be something that someone's going to ingest versus a venom, which is something that if somebody bites something and they inject a poison or a venom into them. That's what venomous is. Versus poisonous, you have to eat it to be poisonous. So these guys here, like I said, are found in Madagascar. So they're only found in one place in the world. But that defense that they have can actually protect themselves from snakes or other types of animals. So they have that great defense of that secretion that she has. So she is mostly going to be aquatic. She is also mostly going to be down in the wet dirt. So she likes to dig really, really far down, which is why I kind of have my hands kind of made into a little burrow for her so that she can kind of burrow. We're going to get her more comfortable. She likes to be hidden, so that's why she's kind of hanging out down there. So I'm going to actually put her in her box so you can see her more close up. And then we'll get one last good look at her, if we can see her through the box. So she has, there's her little face. You can see how brightly colored she is, and she has those different colors on her. So she is one of our other amphibian friends. She's actually our last amphibian friend that we're going to be bringing out here. So Jess is going to come back in and review all of our amphibians, and then we'll take some questions from you guys.
Alrighty, so you met some awesome amphibians today. They all had a few things in common. They laid eggs, and they had to lay eggs in water because they don't have an eggshell. They had that really special skin that can take in oxygen and nutrients. That's called a permeable skin, for those of you guys that are curious. And they also go through a metamorphosis in order to become adults. One thing we do want to talk about with our amphibians is that most places in the world have some kind of an amphibian. You might even have them in your backyard. And if you've ever been outside at night and you hear them croaking and they're being really loud, that's actually a great sign because that means you have amphibians in your backyard. So they have that special skin, and I kind of hinted at this earlier. If you've got a really nice, clean waterway for them to live in, a lot of them are going to live there, and you're going to hear all of those amphibians making their calls. However, if there's pollution or there's trash on the side of your pond or something like that, you're not going to have any amphibians. And you're not going to hear those croaks. So that's why amphibians are what we call an indicator species. And if you guys want to learn more about that, please feel free to ask us some questions. Thank you so much for letting us come out to hang out with you today. And we're going to hand it back over to you guys.
All right. Well, Stephanie and Jess, thank you so much. That was tremendous. And excellent amphibian wrangling skills, because they definitely didn't want to sit still. So thank you so much for all that great information. That really was awesome. So we are going to meet some of our classrooms, but I just want to remind our classrooms, we love to see pictures of you guys in action. So don't forget, you can take some pictures, post them to Twitter, tag the Virginia Zoo, tag Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We love to see those pictures. And let's get to it. Let's meet some of our classrooms. So let's start off. Let's go to Bristol, Connecticut to start. We've got some grade 3s joining us. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 3s?
Good.
Good. Good. Pretty good. Hello.
Good. I need to ask a question about it. So, how long do all them live for?
How long do all of them? You know what? We can tell you exactly how long they live for. So it's gonna vary. That's ornate horned frog. Sorry, ornate horned frog. So Atari can live up to be about 10 years old. Our salamander can actually live to be about 25 years old. Our cane toad can live to be usually 8 to 10 years, but according to our information, there have been cases of them living all the way up to 40 years old. Our tomato frog lives to be about 8, and our white tree frog can live to be about 16. So there's a pretty big difference, but usually you're looking at about 10 to 15 years with some really big outliers.
All right, great question to get us started. Let's check in with Mrs. Oster's class. So I know their internet's being a little tricky today. They're in Thompson. They're a grade 4 class. Let me see how they're doing. Oops. Hey, Mrs. Oster's class, how are you?
Good.
Selena, go ahead
Um, which one's their favorite amphibian?
Which one's our favorite?
Well, so technically we're not supposed to have favorites, but I would be lying if I didn't say that Humpty Dumpty is probably not just one of my favorite amphibians, but one of my favorite animals that I work with in general.
I would say the salamanders are probably my favorite. So we have 2 tiger salamanders. We have Beaker and Bunsen. And then we also have a spotted salamander named Finn. So I really like them. I think they have a really cute little face with their big wide mouths. It kind of looks like they're smiling. So they've been some of my favorites to work with.
All right. Well, those salamanders are really cool. Here in Southern Ontario, we have salamanders, but they're so much smaller. So it's really neat to see a big, big salamander.
Yeah, that's why we brought the bigger guy today.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a trip to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Mr. Blondeau's got some students from grades 4, 5, and 6. Let me turn their microphone on. All right, how we doing, Winnipeg?
My question is, what inspired you guys to become zookeepers?
You can answer first.
Okay.
I got to think about it.
So I've always liked animals. So growing up, I've actually been in the kind of zoo and animal field for about 15 years now. So I started off working with some seals and sea lions at my local zoo, and then I started working with other animals that we have here. So I work with lots of different birds, and now I work with pretty much everything that we have. So we have all different birds and mammals and reptiles. So I just always loved animals out in nature. I was a Girl Scout for a long time, so we also always did a lot of camping and just seeing everybody out in nature, and then also kind of learning more about them and how we can protect them for ourselves. And then I'm also really interested in animal training too. So that's one of my favorite things to do, working with the animals, is working on their training and also bringing them to people and inspiring them to connect to nature. So that's probably one of my favorite things.
I really liked Steve Irwin as a kid, not even gonna lie. I don't know if you guys have heard of the crocodile hunter. He didn't hunt crocodiles, he just looked for them. And he was always talking about how beautiful they are, and he would go out and he would find venomous snakes and other things. And now, of course, we know maybe you shouldn't go up to wild animals in their natural habitat and mess with them, but he was kind of the the forerunner of people showing the world that these animals are awesome and unique, and even though maybe they're weird and we're a little scared of them or apprehensive, they have really great qualities that make them super cool. And so watching him have this passion and love for animals really inspired me to then have this passion and love for animals. And now I'm working in a zoo where I can share that with everybody else.
All right. Thank you for those great answers. And of course, thank you for the question. So Mr. Tornberg's class, they're joining us from California, some grade 5 students, but their microphone's acting up today. So they emailed me a few questions. And the first one is from Alonzo. And he says he couldn't believe a cane toad can eat mice. How big can they get?
So the cane toad that you saw, that's pretty much about as big as he's gonna get. So as Jess is showing.
Yeah.
But when they open their mouth really wide, they can eat anything that they can fit in their mouth. And some frogs or toads will eat something to the point where it's too big for them. So sometimes they try to go after something bigger than their eyes can tell. But something that's kind of cool with them is they all close their eyes when they're eating, and it kind of helps them to get the food back down in their throat. So they might go after small mice that are kind of like miniatures, not full-grown mice, but they eat anything that can fit in that big mouth.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're going to go to Mrs. Harmon's group. There are some kindergarten students joining us from Heartland in the United States. How are we doing, kindergarten?
How are you? Okay, Summer, you can come ask your questions. You can only ask a few questions.
How long could they stay on the ground?
Oh, what a wonderful question. So, and that's actually a really, really cool question. So some of them, remember I said that they take in oxygen and nutrients through their skin? Well, if they're in a really, really wet area with lots of water, if they're not hungry or if they feel like they don't need to eat that day, they may stay underground the whole day. But there are actually some species of amphibians, especially here in the United States or up in Canada, if you're in Canada, that if it gets very, very cold, they can go into a type of hibernation where they bury themselves in the ground and they just stay there for the entire time that it's cold. I don't know specifics if we have any, if the salamander does or not.
The African bullfrog can stay up to like
That's
6
right.
months a year.
So we have an African bullfrog named Prince Charming, and he lives in an area that goes through wet and dry seasons. So during that dry season, he actually is going to bury himself in the ground and stay underground for about 6 months.
All right. And our last live classroom is grade 3s joining us in Mishawaka, Indiana with Mrs. Fisher. Let me turn their microphone on. There it is. How are we doing, grade 3s?
Good. Well, my question was why do only frogs have teeth?
Why do only frogs have teeth? Well, that might seem like an easy question, but it's actually pretty complicated. So frogs, salamanders, toads, and our other friends, Cecilians, who we didn't get to meet today, they all come from the same place. They're in the same family tree. But for whatever reason, frogs just had a need to develop some sharp little teeth to help them eat, and the other ones didn't. So frogs have teeth and the other ones don't. And that's something that we're still sort of trying to discover, what exactly separates out the family trees that way. But that's a great question.
All right. We're going to start visiting our classrooms again. I'm just going to double check. I think we visited everybody. Excellent. And then I will... let's see. Let's start off with our question from Mr. Tornberg's class in my email. So they're wondering, Elijah thought the tiger salamander looked pretty slimy. Are they slimy or did they just look that way?
He was pretty slimy, or she was pretty slimy. So they typically have kind of more of a slime-coated skin, and that helps to protect them. So it helps to keep them kind of safe from drying out if they have that slime coat that they have. And then they also do actually produce some poison in their tail. So they do have poison glands in their tail, but that slimy, slippery helps them to kind of get away from their predators. It could help as a form of defense. Mm-hmm. And then it also helps them keep from drying out. So they kind of bury themselves in the ground. But we also had some water on our gloves too, so we can make sure they don't dry out. So it could have added a little extra slime to them by having that extra water on there.
You might have noticed they were a little slippery.
All right, let's go back to Connecticut. Turn on our microphone and see if they have another question for us.
Why do frogs croak?
Oh, what a great question.
So they have lots of different vocalizations. So they might croak to warn somebody that there's a predator. So maybe there's lots of frogs living out in one area. So they might make a croaking noise to tell other frogs, oh my gosh, I just saw a snake, or I just saw something else.
Or a person.
Or a person, something that might be there that's scary. They also will croak and have different songs that they kind of talk to each other so that maybe they can attract a mate. So if there's a boy frog out there that's looking for a girl frog, they're going to sing a pretty croaking song, and that's going to be able to attract them. So they have different vocalizations for calls that they use for that, and then they also have different types of things that they maybe are warning calls, or just sometimes I think they just like to talk. So sometimes they might just croak a little bit. So I think like our Naveen, our cane toad, he was kind of croaking at me because he wanted me to put him down. Yeah. So that was his vocalization to me, saying, hey, I want to go sit back down.
All right, great question. And we'll go back to our kindergartens with Mrs. Harmon. Your microphone's on. I bet there's another question.
Hey, Maxwell.
Well, when did you get them?
When did we get them?
When did we get them? We got them
In various.
At different times. So
Tiger
some of
Salamander
them
was this year.
Yeah, some of them we just got really recently this past year, and then a couple of them have actually been with us, I want to say like 15 years. Some of our amphibians we've actually had for quite a long time. So it just sort of depends on the animal.
All right.
We can't hear you.
Yeah. No, it doesn't.
There we go. Mr. Bondo's class in Winnipeg, if you guys have another question, go ahead.
What is the most poisonous amphibian you have?
What is the most poisonous or venomous? Yeah, probably the cane toad. All of the other ones we have that have any kind of a poison, it's really more of an irritant. Okay. It's really more, just ignore that. It's more of an irritant. It would kind of make us itchy maybe, but. Oh, I was just talking about ours. Yeah. I mean, we have venomous snakes in our World of Reptile exhibit that are very venomous. We have a king cobra. We've got some rattlesnakes, but we don't work with those. So as far as the animals that we work with, the cane toad probably with that bufotoxin, but in the zoo as a whole, we do have venomous snakes, and we actually have Gila monsters and beaded lizards in our new World of Reptile building too.
All right, let's go to Mrs. Fisher's class again, see if they have another question.
All right, bud. Going up.
What's your favorite name you named your amphibians?
Favorite name? That's a tough one. I really like Beaker and Bunsen. I like the names a lot. Yeah, it's named after Muppets, so I really like that one.
I would say Naveen and Tiana, our cane toads, were the first animals I ever got to name at the zoo. So they were probably my favorite names that I gave.
All right, and let's check in on Mrs. Oster's class, see if they have another question. Your microphone is on.
How much frogs are there in the? How much species of frogs are they?
So there are about 7 between. Some sources say 4, some sources say 7. I think it's up to 7 now. 7,000 different species of amphibians, and most of those are frogs and toads.
500 are salamanders.
500 are salamanders. So roughly 6,000 species of frogs and toads, which is quite a few.
All right, and you did mention that there's the 4 groups. Can you tell us a little bit about the 4th one?
Caecilians. So that's a great question. Caecilians kind of look like big worms. They are usually sort of blind, and they live in deeper waters than a salamander or a frog or a toad would usually. They're very smooth. They don't have any arms or legs, and they're very different even in the amphibian world. The reason we actually don't have one of them is that they are completely aquatic, even as adults. They don't really go up onto land. The reason that they're classified as amphibians is because they still go through that metamorphosis, and they do still use their skin as a way to absorb nutrients and oxygen.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. So we do still have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to open things up to the classrooms. If you do have another question, why don't you send someone right up to the front for me, and that'll be my cue to jump back into that classroom. So if I see someone right up at the front ready to go with the question, then I know I'm going back. And looks like we can go to Connecticut again.
How long do they stay in the egg?
Oh, how long do they stay in the egg? So that, again, is one thing that's different from species to species. I know the white tree frog, they hatch within about 3 days, I think it is. And then within the next 2 or 3 weeks, they go through metamorphosis. So it can happen very, very quickly. But there are some frogs and toads and other amphibians that lay eggs during a time where it's too cold or too dry. And so they'll actually bury them. And those eggs will not hatch until it's a good time for them to hatch. But that's sort of a rarer thing to happen.
And I think I see someone in Winnipeg up at the camera, so your microphone is on.
Which amphibian is the oldest?
Which amphibian is the... Give me 1 second.
We actually have dates written on all of our transports that we have for them. So with our number that we have written on there, we know when it came into the zoo. So we know that our tiger salamanders came into the zoo this year. So they're probably the youngest because they're within about a year or two. They actually came to us from Illinois.
Naveen is 2013.
So Jess is checking all of our coolers to see what date we have on them.
2009 for Humpty Dumpty, 2013 for Naveen, Atari doesn't have one, and then Ruby is 2009, so about 10 years old.
About 10 years is the oldest that ours are, that we know of, because they've been at the zoo for at least 10 years. So we know that our ornate horn frog, as well as our tomato frog, have all been here for at least 10 years.
All right, Mrs. Fisher, your microphone's on.
How old are your amphibians?
So they range anywhere right now. Ours are ranging from about 1.5 to 2 years old to around 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mrs. Oster's class.
Animals are older than you.
They do?
What's the biggest amphibian?
The Chinese giant salamander can actually get up to 5 feet in length.
Yes.
So that is actually the biggest amphibian, and they're one of the most endangered as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I think, yeah, we've got to go back to kindergarten one more time. I see someone waiting nice and patiently at the front.
Okay, Wesley, your turn. Ask.
How do you guys get them to come there?
Oh, well, so our amphibians they like to dig holes and they like to hide. So a lot of times we wake them up from naps when it's time for them to go to work. But just like you guys have to wake up and go to school, if you're not sick that day and you can make it, your parents probably make you go to school. So we always make sure that they're comfortable. We make sure that they're happy and that they are not stressed out. And then we actually just pick them up and we put them in a little box that we can then put into an insulated cooler to keep them warm. And then we bring them to wherever we need to bring them. So it's kind of like if you sit in a car seat, you have to strap yourself in. So we put them in a little transport container to keep them safe. And then when their job is done, they get to go back to their house and they get to dig another hole, which they pretty much do. Yeah.
All right, and our final question will come from our class in California that they've emailed. And Jorge is wondering about the eggs that toads lay. Do you know how many eggs toads lay?
Oh, gosh. Again, so that's something that it depends, but I think that our cane toad, where is it?
30,000 a year or at a time.
So this says up to 30,000 eggs at a time. So frogs, toads, salamanders, Sicilians, they all do lay a lot of eggs at once. And that's usually because not all of those eggs are actually going to end up hatching. So even though they lay 30,000 eggs, that doesn't mean that 30,000 little tadpoles are going to hatch out of it.
A lot of them are 1,000 to 2,000 or 1,000 to 15,000.
You can definitely see how something like a cane toad can become a huge problem in Australia when they're laying that many eggs each time.
They do a good job.
All right. Well, Stephanie and Jess, thank you so much for that awesome presentation. Thank you so much for taking all the questions, classrooms. Great questions as always. And of course, a huge thank you to our amphibian friends who joined us today.
No problem. Thank you guys so much.
All right. So boys and girls, if you did enjoy the presentation today and meeting Stephanie and Jess and the amphibians, I need you to get really loud right now. Really loud. I'm going to turn on the microphones. We're going to say goodbye and thank you. So here we go.
Bye, guys, and thank you.
So I'm going to say that means they enjoyed it. So again, thank you so much. We look forward to another hangout from the Virginia Zoo.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.